Hello and welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 47. My name is Eic Kimberling. I'm here with Cheatham. Kyler, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me, as always.
Yeah, thanks for being here, and excited for part 3 of our Best of 2021 series. The first 2 episodes of our Best of, we talked about people, and then we talked about process. So if you're interested in those 2 topics, be sure to go back to episodes number 45 and 46, where we unpack and dive into the best of those 2 topics or threads within digital transformation. And today we'll dive into the more technical technology side of transformation. Before we do that, though, before we kind of get through the agenda and the plan for today, we just want to mention that we've got new episodes of this show every Wednesday. We have new episodes that premiere on YouTube and LinkedIn every Wednesday. And those new episodes also appear on the audio podcast platforms as well. So on today's show, we've got a great series of topics for you, a great series of clips that we're going to play for you, sort of the best of some of the interviews we've had throughout the year, throughout 2021. Those topics are related to technology. But before we dive into our first clips and our first guest, you've got some recent hot topics related to technology, Kyler, that we're going to dive into here in just a second. And then after we do that, we're going to have in the second segment, we'll have Rob Taylor, who is the IT director of a company called Sight and Sound. They're a client of Third Stages. They recently went through a ERP software evaluation and implementation. So we're going to play you a clip from that long interview. It's about an hour-long interview, but we'll play you about 10 minutes worth of a clip within that talks more about how that particular organization and how we help that client evaluate potential software solutions and help them ultimately pick the right software solution for their organization. So we'll talk with Rob Taylor in segment 2. And then after Rob, we'll have Brad Feeks from a company called Estes Group. And we'll play a clip for you from that interview where he talks about cloud and managed services and some of the considerations you need to have as it relates to cloud versus on-premise. And then finally, we'll have Fabian, who's the CEO of Odoo Software, which is an open source software provider. He'll be on the show later. We'll play you a clip from an early episode of this show where he talks about open source technology in general. He certainly talks about Odoo quite a bit, but it's more focused on just the whole concept of open source, what some of the pros and cons are of that type of technology. So again, the theme here today is more focused on technology. Last week's episode focused more on business process improvement, business process management. And the episode before that in our Best of series focused more on change management or the people side of the equation. So this sort of rounds out the people, process, technology aspects of digital transformation. So before we get into all that, though, and speaking of cloud, we're going to talk with Brad later to talk about cloud type stuff and some of the considerations. And not to spoil it, but there are pros and cons to cloud solutions and the cloud in general. And you have some hot topics that sort of pull on that thread. So what have you got for us, Kyler?
Yeah. So here in the US, our Amazon services and some of the functionalities went down. So if you are an Amazon user, you might have experienced some of the outages. Amazon just recently opened a big IT kind of footprint in Virginia here, which is on the East Coast of the United States. Their AWS, the cloud computing arm of Amazon, and the services in which they offer the cloud to their clients went down yesterday. And basically it affected Netflix, Disney Plus, and then even some airlines such as Delta and Southwest, and payment businesses that utilize AWS, such as Venmo, which is obviously an app-based payment service, which you can transfer funds to. So a lot of the debate going on within our industry is just about cloud concentration, and really underscores how the development has become a really big pain point when it comes to working with these tech giants. It's almost like the technology got a little ahead of the processes. Earlier this year, Gartner forecasted that 21% of worldwide users will actually spend on public cloud services, and that will equal about 330 billion in 2021. So that's a huge number, obviously. So I wanted to get your feedback on that, Eic, just to kind of think about, like, are we putting all of our eggs in one basket when it comes to cloud concentration? And how do we work as a community to kind of diversify that when we only have a few really large cloud-based options for these types of things?
Yeah. So being true to my consulting self, I have to ask you a question before I answer yours.
Sure.
I get more because I'm curious than anything. Do you know why, or did they state why that outage happened with AWS?
They said that it was a technical issue that they were working through. So obviously very vague. But basically they kind of narrowed down the Virginia area as where the actual technical issues were.
Okay. So all these different providers you mentioned, like Netflix and Venmo and a lot of other customers of AWS were affected. I suspect there were probably businesses that aren't as high profile as, say, a Netflix going down. Were there other businesses involved too?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there was definitely a variety of businesses affected. As I mentioned, as we were chatting before this episode, Amazon Music Services went down, which in my household full of toddlers is a big deal when Alexa does not play Baby Shark. That's,
Right.
a real big problem for us.
You guys must have been in full on crisis mode.
We
when this
really
happened.
were, but luckily we're innovators and we made it through, us Cheathams. But yeah, so basically talking about the risks of outages, the risks of hackers, the risks of other tools compromising the cloud and basically shutting down businesses, and they don't have any control over that. So we've seen that with a few different tech giants. So a lot of thought leaders in the industry are cautious when it comes to just kind of jumping on the bandwagon of large cloud hosting systems.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I've always been a little bit skeptical of the cloud in general, not because I don't think it's not because I think it's a bad idea, but just because I think it's too often perceived to be a foolproof silver bullet to solve all the world's problems, which clearly it's not. I think where companies get into trouble is they don't recognize what some of those trade-offs are with cloud solutions. And especially, when you look at these big cloud providers, I have to wonder, when you look at the AWSs of the world or the Azures of the world, are they getting too big and too complicated to be able to effectively service, their entire customer base? And how big is too big? At what point do they reach some sort of max of what they can scale? Those are just more questions than anything. But I think what you're seeing, or perhaps maybe the early signs that there are, cracks in the foundation of cloud, and there's definitely a dark side. I can't imagine, certainly a lot of people felt the Amazon Music and the Netflix and the Venmo being down, but I couldn't imagine if I was a mom and pop shop that was trying to just fill customer orders. I can't fill customer orders because I've got my technology all hosted with AWS or some other big provider, and then they go down. So that's sort of the dark side. On the flip side, just to play devil's advocate, though, you have to figure, okay, AWS went down for a day. That sucks. That's unfortunate. But how often does that happen with the average mid-size organization in their IT department trying to manage their infrastructure? Is that more or less risky for that organization to have someone else hosting that, or or can those outside hosting providers do it better than their internal IT staff might be able to? So those are some of the considerations, but I do think this all opens up and should open people's eyes to the other options that are out there, because I think there are smaller sort of mid-tier cloud and hosting providers that maybe they don't have the size and scale and the mass cost efficiency that an Amazon or AWS has, or an Azure might have, but they might be able to provide better service, more focused service. They're not too big. And actually getting back to one of our guests today, Brad Feeks from Estes Group, he's an example, or he works for an organization that's an example of a good alternative that you might consider with AWS. And then finally, the last thing I'd say is, I know this is not a popular comment in this industry, but I'll say it anyway, because I'm not getting paid to say otherwise. And I'm not getting paid to say anything, by the way. So that gives me the freedom to say whatever I want. But you do have to look at, do we need our entire business in the cloud? Does it all need to be in the cloud? Maybe there's certain applications that make sense to be in the cloud, but there's certain core, critical, confidential, sensitive, operationally critical type things that we want our keep on-premise. And I know, God forbid, we shouldn't use the word on-premise anymore. And on-premise should be obsolete according to much of the industry.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, it's software vendors that have the most to gain by having everyone move to the cloud. But I think as a business, you have to really look at, where does the cloud make sense? Where doesn't it? And, where might we keep some either on-premise solutions, or maybe we diversify and we have multiple cloud providers. That's another thing too. Just like, you diversify in day-to-day life and running a business, you might want to diversify your cloud options as well. So those are some initial thoughts, or sort of a knee-jerk reaction to that, because I wasn't aware of the outage, quite frankly, until you mentioned it to me.
You weren't listening to Baby Shark on repeat?
I was not, and I
absolutely nothing.
Yeah, well, I don't watch Netflix much either. So I don't watch TV or plug into the media in general. So I just don't know a lot of what's going on in the world, unfortunately.
Well, don't worry. I'm here to keep you with it.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's my job. So when it comes to contingency plans, that's something a lot of dialogue has been around, especially with the AWS outage. How do you plan for this, or how can you put in a backup plan if you are a CIO that are utilizing these hosting services? Because like you said, hey, we might go down for a day, but we certainly have all the backing of Amazon's muscle to make sure we don't get any sort of ransomware or cyber attack or things like that. So there are benefits to it, but how do you create a contingency plan or go about putting that into place?
That's a good question. It was a little bit more straightforward in the days of on-premise, or when more applications were on-premise. You would have your backups, you would have your disaster recovery sorts of plans. But I think, unfortunately, a lot of organizations have ceded total control of their infrastructure to these cloud providers. So I don't think they necessarily have a solid plan for what to do or how to navigate that.
Definitely. And it seems like something that takes a lot of expertise to be able to do, whether you're talking to people like Brad or things like that, but just having that awareness that there needs to be some sort of scenario built around what happens if this big hosting platform goes down. What's kind of our triage plan to make sure that we don't lose a bunch of revenue. And with that, that's a good kind of segue into some of the other dialogue that's been specifically around cloud integrations and how difficult it's been for some businesses to move from a SaaS service to a cloud solution and kind of lose a lot of the integrations that they had in place with, whether it's another bolt-on system or something like that, has been kind of a struggle. Is that something that you've seen as a trend with migrating to the cloud as well?
Yeah, it has been a challenge just because the integration tools aren't as developed and robust as the on-premise legacy systems, just because they haven't been around as long in the cloud application environment in most cases. Obviously, that statement does not apply to the native cloud solutions of the world, like Salesforce or NetSuite or Workday, some of those types of systems. But one other thing I'd add on top of what you said is that even in cases where, say, on one hand, you have cases where the integration is more challenged with these cloud offerings. But in other cases, these cloud offerings themselves are driving the need for more integration because they're not complete, they're not fully developed.
Good point.
And so it creates this need to have to integrate to other solutions to sort of fill the gaps or fill the voids. So it's sort of a double whammy, if you will, in terms of the lack of maturity of a lot of cloud solutions, both in terms of its own functionality, but also in terms of how you integrate it to other systems. That creates that double whammy of now you suddenly have to integrate more because of the lack of maturity of the functionality. But at the same time, you're getting hit with the reality that the integration tools aren't quite as robust. I think that integration tools, though, I think are coming along faster, it seems like, which makes sense because it's not as hard to create APIs and integration tools in general as it is to create robust, end-to-end workflows and functionality within an ERP system, for example.
Yeah. So when we talk about CPI systems like SAP's cloud platform integration, those types of things, it has a long way to go before it gets to the on-premise solution. So what are some of those gaps that customers, maybe specifically for SAP, are experiencing in kind of the lag of technology to move to the cloud as opposed to the on-premise solution? What are some gaps there that they experience?
The biggest ones we see, primarily just because of the types of clients we have throughout the world at third stage, is on the manufacturing front. So when you get into complex manufacturing environments like engineer to order manufacturing environments, or if you're a big provider of asset management or capital intensive types of products, like an aerospace company that builds airplanes or rockets or whatever, all the project management and costing and all the stuff that goes into that, that's a pretty complex process. And those types of organizations are the ones that are testing the limits of a lot of these systems, like SAP's S4HANA or Microsoft D365, Oracle Cloud, et cetera. If you're a vanilla type of company, a younger company, smaller, less complex, you're less likely to run into those problems. But again, it's just not the same as it was with the on-premise solutions that had been around for 10, 20 years and been constantly upgraded and updated over those years and decades. Now, all of a sudden, you have relatively new cloud technologies that are rewrites largely, that are built for the cloud. But now you're still trying to move a lot of that functionality that it took you 20 years to write or whatever. Now you're trying to move it all over very quickly to the cloud, which isn't happening as fast as some organizations need it to.
Yeah. So is that how your approach should be? Should you be mindful that this is kind of an innovation, is still being built when you are moving to the cloud? And is there a middle ground, which I know you and Brad kind of talk about a hybrid solution a little bit later, but is there an option to do both?
There is. Yeah, there is an option to do both. And I guess looking at the silver lining of the fact that a lot of these ERP and enterprise technologies are not fully developed, it's creating this need to integrate, in many cases, integrate to some legacy on-premise solutions. I guess the silver lining in that reality is that it does give you a sort of redundancy or diversification of, to where all your data, all your systems are not in one place. You've got a lot of it in a cloud or hosting provider, but then you've got some of them on-prem potentially that are being hosted on site, or like I said before, there's nothing wrong with having multiple cloud providers too. Your individual cloud provider would probably advise you against that because they want you to put all their money with them.
Sure.
And they probably tell you what a terrible idea it is and all the reasons you shouldn't do it. But the reality is you can, and if it makes sense, you should do it. So that's I guess those are some of the things to think through.
Absolutely. Well, last on my list here is I wanted to talk through Solutions Review came out with their top 5 ERP vendors worth watching today for 2022. And some of them I've never heard of before. Most of them I've never heard of before. So I wanted to give you the list and then maybe get your feedback on that technology. So Eic Software Solutions. It sounds like a cloud native manufacturing ERP solution, but I've never heard of them before. Have you worked with them?
I know we've evaluated that solution, very limited. I mean, not a lot, but in manufacturing and distribution settings, I know we have a handful of times in the past, but I don't know that we as a team have implemented it in the past. So that might be one that is a smaller up and coming vendor, which is probably why it made the list. So I'm not super familiar with it now.
Yeah, it sounds like it had some notable acquisitions this year that's allowed it to expand some capabilities. So we'll keep kind of a radar on that. What about Priority Software?
Yes, I am familiar with them, largely because they do focus on manufacturing. They've been around for a long time. They have a decent presence in the Middle East and Europe, I believe. Not so much in the Americas. I'm not sure about Asia or Asia Pacific, but they have decent functionality, and they've been on an acquisition binge of sorts lately, going out and buying some other spot solutions to increase the robustness of their core solution. So yeah, that is a good solution that I'm familiar with.
Excellent. Yeah, it sounds like they're a cloud-based ERP system as well, and they've gone through a couple new software updates and acquisitions this year, which got them on a people to watch list. So what about Tyler Technologies? I actually have heard of them, but they focus on public sector, from what I understand, with integrated software and technology services. Have you worked with Tyler before?
Yeah, we have a client that is implementing that right now. In fact, you are close to someone on our team that is involved in that project. I'm not going to mention names, but
my eavesdropping, I'm like, I know that one, but
right.
Yeah, public versus private seems to be something that is trending within the industry, and just deciding, as we've gone over kind of the U.S. Air Force versus Navy and different public sector government infrastructures that are going through some transitions. So definitely something that's trending in the industry. So it sounds like they have a new leadership team too that has kind of driven growth for Tyler Technologies as well.
Okay, I did not know that last part. I didn't know there's a new leadership team in place, so that's good to know.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm probably going to say this last one wrong. I think it's Uninet. It's UNANET.
No, I can't say I've heard of that one myself personally. Not to say that others on our team have not been involved, but they may have the experience that I don't. But I am not familiar with that one. What can you tell us about that one? What do you know?
I can. It's interesting because it kind of matches. This list kind of matches our upcoming industries, our verticals that we kind of talked about. So this one is more of the infrastructure side. It talks about architecture, construction, engineering, and professional services. And really turning that actionable data into an automation, central processes, those types of things. In 2021, they actually launched Govcon Solution, and it's a new solution from their company. And then also some updates for its ERP and CRM functionalities. So something I'm sure a lot of our construction clients that we have here might consider within their software evaluation journeys.
That's good to know. We have a handful of construction and construction related clients, so that's good to know. I'm not familiar with that. I'd be curious to hear if others on our team have been involved with that.
Definitely, we'll have to ask one. And the last one is Workday, which we know very well, and you've talked about as well. So I think Workday actually fell off our top systems of 2022 this year list, just because it's so focused on HR finances and kind of planning solutions.
Yeah, that's a good point about Workday. They did fall out of our top 10 ERP systems, largely because there's other systems out there that provide more complete ERP functionality, but also because there's a lot of issues in the Workday ecosystem that we're seeing as far as implementations gone wrong, and a lot of VARs and implementing partners that are struggling with their implementations. And so I think it's a combination of the fact that there's other better ERP systems that provide more complete functionality, but also the implementations are struggling, largely because they're just growing so fast. I mean, they're growing so quickly that I personally think they're getting in over their heads largely.
Yeah, it looked like they acquired 3 new companies recently. So that must be a lot of kind of acquisition things to kind of work through. I wasn't sure if you were, biased against them because they are a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrants, which I know you love so much. So
yes, I love the completely unbiased Gartner quadrants because vendors definitely do not pay for those, and they do not get paid to feature prominently certain vendors in the top of the quadrant.
Right.
But all kidding is, all sarcasm aside, though, I mean, I always take the Magic Quadrants with a grain of salt because they're commissioned by vendors, so you kind of know who's going to land on top when a vendor commissions a study from Gartner. But no, I'm actually not against Workday. If I were to narrow it down to HCM and financials, Workday, would be not, I don't want to say number one, but certainly toward the top of that list, just because it's one of the best HCM and financial time tracking, resource planning types of systems out there. But if you're a manufacturing company that wants like a complete ERP system, Workday may not be the best solution for you. So that's really the limitation there. But where they fit well, they fit really well. So I think that's what you just have to make sure you're a good fit for them and they're a good fit for you before you pull the trigger on Workday.
Right. And speaking of good fit, I think that's a great transition to play our clip of Rob Taylor of Sight and Sound, because he's going to talk a little bit about it. The evaluation process that he experienced when going through his Microsoft Dynamics 365 transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. I planned that segue beautifully. It was totally planned. So with that, though, we'll take a quick break. And like you said, Kyler, we'll bring back Rob Taylor, who's the IT director of Sight and Sound. We'll talk about the software evaluation or the technology evaluation process.